Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Shish of Powered by Quilting. This is month 4 of our Wish Block of the Month, which is this awesome, really large quilt that I'm holding, and then it's actually pictured right here. Month 4, we are making this block right here. I'm like having to look. We are making this block right here in month 4. We are only making 4 blocks this month. And this is a great month, like month 3, to go back and finish some of the blocks that you haven't made in the previous months. So if you are looking to start this block of the month or catch up, all the previous videos are on the channel and you can go ahead and take a look. So this month, we are going to take our pattern, all right, and we are going to be using pages 11 and 12. So 11 and 12 is the pattern pages that you're using. If you are not going to be using Morris Mist and you're using your own fabric, make sure you are referencing the fabric swatch page that you made all the way back in month 1 or at the beginning of the quilt to make sure you're getting the right fabrics, because we have fabric A, fabric C, fabric E, fabric G, and background. Okay, so a couple things that to note. All of the background squares that we are doing today, we are cutting in half, corner to corner, to make a triangle. And so I have left like one set to kind of demo that. And I'm going to grab a ruler. That's fine. The way I do this is once I cut my squares, I don't actually like place them all together. I find it much easier to cut your square and then without really moving your square too much, because you usually have 2 pieces of fabric or more depending on if you've stacked your strips, to cut your diagonals at that point. Hi Maisie, hi Tessa, happy afternoon. And so when you have your squares already cut, it's much easier to not adjust any of your fabric to cut your diagonal. It's just more accurate that way. So what you do is you'll want to essentially take your ruler, make sure you see both points just like by a fraction of a hair, essentially. So when you're cutting, you're actually cutting point to point. All right. And then you have your nice little triangles. Okay. So all of your background squares are getting cut in half. And we are going to do essentially a nod back to month 1 where we're doing a square and a square. Now, in month 1, in that video, what I've told you to do is make sure that you are folding your center square, which is fabric C. It's the smaller version of fabric C. You're going to fold this in half to find that center line. So this is how you're going to essentially align your triangles to find that piece. And what I would do in this case, it kind of depends on how accurate or how much you want to essentially trim, I guess. I do give you a lot of wiggle space. So if you're good at eyeballing, not like that is obviously not in the center, but if you're plus or minus just a hair off this line just by eyeballing, you can go ahead and do that, because I do give you enough to trim. If you are off by like half an inch, don't eyeball, you should probably fold, okay? So with this fold line, you know where that center is. You know where your point is going to be. So you want your point on the line, and you want your raw edge, that long diagonal, to align with the edge of your piece and your square, like so. I'm gonna scoot that back up. And we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch off that raw edge, okay? And once we do that, we're gonna sew the other side as well, all right? I'm going to turn on my iron because we're going to use that next. But we're going to sew one side, open this up, align the other piece, and sew it on the other side. I did not come in first. I was in the middle of the pack, I think. More than anything. I just looked at my results. But it was really fun. It was good. I was tired because I ran last week as well. But the reason why we're starting late today is I did the hot chocolate 15K this morning. Last week I did the Goldie's 10 miler, and that race was really fun, but I didn't really recover well from it since I was traveling all week. And so today was a little harder, even though it was a shorter race. All right, so now that we've sewed both sides, we're gonna go and iron our triangles open. And we're gonna add the other 2 triangles that we're gonna need for the block, or this unit rather. This is a nod to how we made them in month 1. I would essentially chain piece this all together. So you have all of your inside squares, you have all your triangles. In this case, you are making them all identical, so I would have a stack of triangles and a stack of squares, and do all the squares on one side of the triangle, flip them over, do the other side before I press every single center square, okay? And now we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna essentially now fold this direction. Make sure that we have that to get the center line here. And we're now going to add our triangles the other way. So line up the center, line up our raw edges to sew this 1/4 inch, and then we're gonna open and sew the other side as well. So we end up with a square and a square, like so, okay? Thanks. I run with Jeff Galloway's method, which is a run walk. I find it significantly easier. And just running and moving your body and things like that just make me happier. So it's like a win-win all around, right? Like health benefit and easier running, because I feel like running straight is exhausting and tiring. Okay, so now that we have both sides done, we are going to go ahead, iron these, and now we're going to trim. I typically like using a Cute Cuts ruler. You could theoretically use a larger square ruler, but my Cute Cuts ruler has this awesome seam allowance edge on the outside. And so when I align my ruler, I can essentially say, okay, my point is going to have to be right at that seam allowance edge, and I can center this square if it's slightly off or anything like that to what I want to look at. And I cut 2 sides, okay? And I do that because otherwise I'm going to have to essentially rotate the piece, and I personally don't like doing that. So I cut 2 sides, and then I'm going to take a larger square ruler that I left over there by accident and trim the other side, 2 sides, right? So I have the 2 sides that I cut that now I'm just going to trim this to size. You'll essentially make a whole bunch of these to make all the squares that you're going to need, or all the squares that you're going to need for month 4 blocks. But I magically have a few that we've made for our other pieces, okay? The next step that we're going to be doing is we are going to be making hourglass blocks. So you have fabric A and E and G. So A, E, and G. I had to look back at this. What we're going to do is we are going to take our fabric G's, because they're a lighter color. You can pick whatever one that you chose for your fabric, whichever one's lightest. And we're going to draw a line on the back of this square from diagonal to diagonal. So I'm taking a heat erasable pen, but you can also use a pencil or something that, will mark nicely and softly on the fabric. And I essentially go corner to corner, and I am going to mark this line down. What we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1/4 inch on either side of this line. You can also use your clearly perfect angles in this case. Normally I would do that. This is what that looks like. Clearly perfect angles. Comes in that package, but it looks like this, where you set it up on your machine. I have some extra tape lines on mine because it's a little older and I make bags, so there's a little bit of other tape seam allowances for me for when I make bags. But because these squares are a little larger, using your Clearly Perfect angles, you want where your needle hits and where the end of the piece is to still be on the bed of the machine. These are just too big, so I essentially draw the line. And then we are going to take our other fabric, and we're going to put them right sides together, like so, and so on either side of the line. Okay. When you're making hourglass blocks versus half square triangles, you do not trim your pieces. So this is identical to what I would say the process is to make half square triangles. The difference is half square triangles you trim before you're finished. With hourglass blocks, at least my patterns, you do not trim at all until you have your hourglass block completed. So you are not trimming these down to half square triangles. So once you have those sewn on both sides, we're going to take our ruler and cut on the line that we just made in the middle. And we have 2 half square triangles, okay? You're going to do that with fabric A and G and E and G to make multiple half square triangles. In this case, I am going to press away from fabric G on both of my pieces, or in both of the fabrics. Essentially, everything goes away from fabric G. If fabric A and E in your fabric selection are both lighter than fabric G, then you could theoretically do opposite of this. But what we're going to do is take one of these non-trimmed half square triangles of fabric A and one of the fabric E. I made a couple extra, so I'm going to just iron that out. And we're going to take an hourglass block from it. Make an hourglass block from it, okay? So, this is fabric A and fabric G, fabric E and fabric G. And now if you'll see, we have our hourglass block is going to have 2 of our fabric G's. So we want them separate when we put these together. So putting an hourglass block together, you want your sewn line to match, and you want to make sure that you don't have the same fabric on top of each other in this case, okay? And then the difference on this case, where we drew the line corner to corner, we are going to draw the line perpendicular to the sewn line, corner to corner, okay? So that sewn line is left to right, and we're going to draw a line top to bottom, like so. And now we're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from this drawn line where it's perpendicular. So what's going to happen is when I open this, like so, we have an hourglass block on this side, and then we have an hourglass block on this side, okay? So that center seam, nest them together before you sew your 1/4 inches. And now that we are sewing these down into our hourglass blocks, we will now trim these to size, okay? So I'm going to do 2 different types of trimming. One, using our clearly slotted trimmers. So before we even do that, I'm going to cut these apart to our 2 hourglass blocks. Ta-da! With your clearly slotted trimmers, you're going to use trimmer A, and you're going to essentially align your dotted line with the sewn line, and then that center line with the previous sewn line, okay? So that center line here is also a stitch line, your stitch line down here, to then cut and trim off your excess and the dog ears. So what you have left, ta-da, throw the trimmings away, is a beautiful half square triangle. So I'm going to press this open. I got funky with that ironing, but that's okay. So you have an hourglass block. Now for this side, pretend you don't have a trimmer A. I'm going to press the block open and I'm going to essentially trim up this block with a normal square ruler. Now what I will say is this is harder, and almost all of my patterns need the clearly slotted trimmers. So if you don't have those yet, make sure to get them. They are like the best tools ever. And then spray grippy on the back because of these little slots. If you are cutting towards you without the grippy, they're really slick. So they're not like the Creative Grids rulers where there's already roughness on the back to catch on the fabric. So safety tip. So in this case, I like using a larger than size ruler, and I know I want to cut this to 4.5. Okay. So what that does is I'm going to align this ruler where I have a 45-degree with one of the Hourglass Blocks 45-degree rulers. And then at the 4.5 on each side, that should intersect where the other diagonal hits, right? So at 4.5 here, I should be where that color changes on that line, and that center diagonal follows that one, right, on one side. Make sense? So I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 sides of that one to the size, rotate this 180, and then trim it down to the appropriate 4.5, where now that center line also falls there, and where the 4.5 on both sides of my ruler is where that color change happens with the Hourglass block, like so. There you have it. 2 different ways to trim your Hourglass blocks. And I happen to have a couple extras that I've made. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we are going to lay out our month 4 block. I'm going to take our design board and lay out our block. So our fabric C, where we have our bigger square, we're going to take one of those and lay that out in the middle. Okay. And then our Hourglass block gets laid out. Actually, I have to turn the direction because I don't remember which direction our Hourglass block gets laid in. All right, so our Hourglass block has our fabric A towards the outside in the middle, like so, and fabric E framing that center, like so. And our square and a squares are in the corner, okay? Now, why do you think that we have done it this way? Our fabric A on the outside. So what happens if you turn these blocks 180? I mean, you still get the same shape. What you lose is the fact that this block in the quilt, let me see if I can't show you this. That block in the quilt creates an arrow on this side with a month 1 block, right? It has this little nice arrow right here. That's all the same fabric. So if you have this Hourglass rotated 180, that arrow actually gets destroyed because you end up with these little tails from month 1 and then this being a different fabric on that side. And then also with month 2, I think this is month 2, this fabric A with your block here also connects. So if you actually rotate your Hourglass blocks 180, you kind of destroy the pattern that this block brings with the blocks around it. All right, so now we have our blocks laid out. What we're going to do is we are going to sew this with web piecing. If you've watched me for a while, I web piece pretty much everything. And you can use it whenever you have a grid. So in this case, you have a 3x3 grid where you have a column 1, column 2, column 3, and you have rows 1, 2, and 3. What we're going to do is we're going to take column 2 and lay it right sides together on top of column 1. Then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch all the way down, like that. So I'm going to take this and we're going to sew this together, and we are not going to cut our thread in between each of the rows. We're going to just continue sewing and chain piecing this all the way down. fun to do one print and two solids. Column 3. All right. So now that we have that sewn, what does this look like? We're going to essentially now open this. These are all connected, and you do not have this little thread cut. So we have columns 1 and 2 sewn together. Now we're going to add column 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to take column 3 and place it right sides together with literally what we just sewn. And now we're going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch. And we're also not going to cut our chain piecing threads yet. So I'm actually going to do that here. Realign my pieces because I moved. Normally I bring the design board with me to the machine, but then you can't see it on camera, so there we have it. And then we're going to take our piece here, like so. So now, I'm going to put the design board up. We essentially have our block kind of sewn together. It's all attached. If I dropped this block right now, I can pick it back up. Nothing is going to be turned or out of place. It is all kind of done. This is a great place if you had to go run out or do something different to stop, because it's pretty easy to tell the last 2 seams that you have to sew. One thing I haven't talked about yet is pressing. Okay, so I give you certain pressing instructions in this pattern, but if you don't like clashing seams in the assembly or whatnot, and want to press your seams open for everything, one of the things that you will need to do after you sew the long seams together here, in order to press these seams open, you will need to snip these chain piecing threads. But because I'm pressing to one side, I will be nesting my seams and then pressing to one direction. My chain piecing threads can stay as is. It really only matters if you're pressing your seams open, that sometimes you may end up with big, like, oh yeah, that doesn't open, I need to snip that chain piecing thread. So what I like to do for this block, and I'm going to talk about my seam allowances or which way they're pressing. For the top, I like to press out, in, and then out. Okay, that's just kind of preference because this block in the middle is solid, so I want my seams pressing inwards, which then means these seams have to go out. Right? So normally when I make this quilt, then I usually always chain piece and assembly line piece all of the blocks at one time. Typically, I don't just make one of these blocks. I look at the instructions and say, oh, I need to make 4 of these. Let me make all the units for 4. Let me web piece all 4 of them together. And so at the end, typically I am making 4 blocks at a time, or however many blocks the pattern calls for. But I figure on YouTube, for someone who's not watching me live, you didn't really want to watch me sew all of the blocks together, because that honestly is very boring, but it's repetitive at this case, okay? So now that I have my seams pressed, what we're going to do is we are going to sew these long seams together, okay? We have 1 and 2. And what I do now is, because I press my seams in opposite directions, I can put these right sides together and essentially pin my seams where the seams nest and sew a 1/4 inch away. I'm going to actually do this underneath the machine camera with a fork pin. So I use these Clover fork pins. They are essentially a double pin in one. And I pin on either side of that seam nest. Okay, so I nest my seams here and I pin on either side. I like the Clover fork pins because you can theoretically sew through them fairly easily as long as you don't hit the pin at the fastest speed your machine can go. The needle will hit the pin and slide over it. If you go super fast, you can break your pin, you can break your needle, you can throw your machine out of time. I don't recommend it. So what you'll see me do here is you'll see me speed up and slow down when I come to a pin. Okay. So sewing now, a 1/4 inch away, and you'll see me like slow down as I get to a pin. Make sure I get through all the pins before I speed back up. And then slow back down to when I reach that pin. Speed back up to finish. And then what I'll do here is I'll open up that seam and I'll sew the other side before I go to the iron, just because getting up and down is honestly not the best. Not very fun. The way I have my sewing setup done. I know a couple folks have their sewing machine and they're cutting and they're ironing all kind of within reach, sitting at the same location. That is ideal, but I do not have that there. So I've gone through and I've pinned the other 2 nested seams, and now we're going to sew my long seam on this side. When I get to the pins, just to make sure I don't hit them, and speed back up again. So now our block is actually sewn together. It just needs to get pressed. So we've sewn both of our long seams, and now we are going to press them. I think using practice fabrics, Tessa, I think is a great idea, especially if you are really short or using precious fabric you don't want to have any accidents on. All right. Pressing these out. All right, so this is our month 4 block, and we are going to be making 4 of them. All right, so that's kind of what all of this extra fabric is for the other 3 blocks for month 4. And that is Wish for month 4. What we're going to do right now is we are going to cut stream and start Love Letter month 1, because we're running 2 block of the months lives on the same day. So month 5 of Wish will be on the 2nd Saturday in May, which honestly I don't even know the date yet, so give me 1 second. 2nd Saturday in May is May 11th. So on May 11th at noon versus 1 p.m. Today was a little late because of the race I had this morning, but May 11th at noon we will be doing month 5 of Wish, block of the month. And honestly, month 5 is the largest. It is like this entire center section of the quilt. It is huge. It is big. It is very fun. But yeah, that's what we're going to do. And then we're also going to do Love Letter month 2 when we finish month 5. So that is kind of the idea. We're going to do duplications until we're done with Wish, and then Love Letter will then just be the only one on the 2nd Saturday of the month. So give me a few minutes and I'm going to cut stream and then restart so that Love Letter is a separate stream. Have a great day and leave questions below if you have them, and I'll answer them when I see them. Have a great day. See you soon.